The heavy iron gates of the Obsidian citadel groaned open, welcoming a king who looked less like a conqueror and more like a man haunted by a ghost. Inside the warmth of the royal wing, the air grew thick with the frantic energy of the pack's healers. They swarmed around the bed where Patricia lay, her skin still mapped with the delicate blue-white veins of magical hypothermia. Donald stood at the foot of the bed, his obsidian armor reflecting the flickering torchlight, his golden blue crest pulsing in a rhythm that matched the Omega's fading heartbeat. Dr. Eris, the head physician, worked with desperate speed, his hands glowing with a soft mending light. "The frost isn't just in her blood, Your Highness," he whispered, his voice tight with fear. "It's in her spirit. This is Malphas's work, a curse designed to turn the soul to glass." Donald's jaw tightened, his fingers digging into the stone banister. Every pained whimper that escaped Patricia's blue-tinted lips felt like a physical blow to his own chest. The fated bond, newly awakened, acted as a live wire between them. He could feel her terror, a cold, drowning sensation that threatened to overwhelm his own senses. He realized then that his restlessness was gone, replaced by a possessive, protective fury that made the shadows in the room dance with his power. He was the king of ruin, a male who had spent his life building walls of emotional isolation. But as he watched the silver-haired stranger struggle for a single breath, those walls didn't just crumble, they exploded. He stepped closer, ignoring the healer's protests, and laid his hand over her. His warmth a silent promise that he would hunt down any god or man who dared to harm his mate. When the first rays of the pale winter sun cut through the obsidian casements, Patricia's rose-red eyes snapped open. The warmth of the room felt like a physical weight, a staggering contrast to the crystalline grave that had nearly claimed her. Gasping for air that didn't burn her lungs, she scrambled backward, her silver hair whipping around her as she realized she was no longer in the woods. She wasn't just in any room. She was in the heart of a fortress that reeked of alpha dominance, a scent of smoke, cedar, and overwhelming power. Donald was there before she could reach the edge of the silk-laden bed. He moved with a predator's grace, his massive frame blocking the only exit. "Don't," he commanded, his voice a low vibration that seemed to settle in her very marrow. Patricia flinched violently, her small, calloused hands flying to her chest to protect the artifact she still felt burning beneath her skin. To her, he was the personification of every nightmare, a ruthless king whose reputation for emotional isolation preceded him. "You are safe," he said, though the words sounded foreign on his tongue. He stepped into the light, letting her see the glowing cerulean crest on his chest that pulsed in time with her own frantic heart. The soul bond flared between them, a white-hot thread of fate that made Patricia gasp in recognition. Donald knelt, bringing his towering height down to her level, a gesture of submission that stunned them both. He reached out, not to seize her, but to offer his open palms. In that moment, he spoke the mate's vow, a binding oath that as long as he drew breath, no shadow, no cult, and no high priest would ever touch her again. The heavy silence of the chamber was broken only by the crackle of the hearth as Patricia finally lowered her guard, her fingers trembling against the silk sheets. Between them lay the artifact, a sphere of pulsing amber light known as the Stolen Sun. "Malphas doesn't just want power," she whispered, her rose-red eyes fixed on the glow. "He wants to rewrite the world in frost." She explained that the artifact was the heart of the realm's thermal balance, and the high priest intended to use it to drain the heat from every living soul to power an eternal holy winter. Donald's golden blue crest flared with a lethal intensity as he listened. He saw the way she looked at the amber sphere, not with greed, but with a terrifying sense of responsibility. She told him how she had been a temple servant, an overlooked Omega, who realized the purification Malphas preached was actually a mass execution. "The blizzard in the forest wasn't weather," she said, her voice cracking. "It was him, reaching out through the ice to reclaim his battery. To him, I am just a vessel, a tool." The king's possessive fury surged, rattling the obsidian ornaments on the walls. He realized that the unnatural cold plagued his kingdom because Malphas was already experimenting with the sun's power. But more importantly, he saw the deep trauma etched into Patricia's features, the belief that she was expendable. He reached across the space between them, his large hand hovering just inches from the artifact, but his eyes never left hers. "In this citadel, you are the sun," he declared, his voice a low, resonant vow that shook the very foundation of the room. "And I will tear the cathedral of bone stone from stone before I let him dim your light." The air in the private solar grew heavy as the stolen sun pulsed between them, its amber light reflecting in the obsidian walls. Patricia reached out, her fingers brushing the cold metal of Donald's gauntlet as she moved to adjust the artifact. The moment her skin made contact with the glowing cerulean crest on his chest, a violent jolt of energy arced through the room. Donald let out a choked sound, his eyes snapping wide as a searing warmth flooded his veins, chasing away the bone-deep chill that had plagued him for years. He collapsed back into his heavy chair, his breath coming in ragged gasps. For the first time since he had been cursed, the constant grinding pressure in his chest was gone. Patricia pulled back, her face pale with shock, her hands glowing with a faint silvery residue. I didn't mean to," she whispered, her rose-red eyes wide with fear. But Donald wasn't angry. He looked down at the crest, which had settled from a frantic pulse into a steady, calm glow. She hadn't just touched him. She had woven the fractured threads of his soul back together, the faded bond, previously a mere tether, transformed into a roaring bridge. He could feel her essence, the ancient Aurelian magic flowing through her like a subterranean river. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. His ruthlessness, his isolation, and even his curse were all precursors to this moment. He wasn't just her protector. He was her counterpart. He reached out, his bare hand trembling as he cupped her face. The soul bond was now fully realized, a holy union of frost and fire that promised to either save the kingdom or consume it entirely. The peace of the solar was shattered by a sound like 1,000 mirrors breaking. High Priest Malphas's hunters had not merely found the citadel. They had bypassed the stone walls using the unnatural cold as a bridge. The temperature in the room plummeted, and frost began to crawl up the obsidian pillars in jagged, hungry patterns. Patricia clutched the stolen sun to her chest, her rose-red eyes reflecting the shadows of the 4 hooded figures who materialized from the swirling sleet. They were cold walkers, husks of men sustained only by the high priest's dark magic. Donald reacted before the first frostbolt could leave a hunter's hand. He surged to his feet, a predatory roar tearing from his throat that vibrated the very floorboards. He didn't reach for a blade. With his curse stabilized by Patricia's touch, his own alpha power had become a physical weapon. He moved with a speed that defied his massive frame, a blur of obsidian and cerulean light. The first hunter was caught by the throat, the sheer heat radiating from Donald's skin causing the creature's icy form to hiss and evaporate into a cloud of bitter steam. As the remaining three closed in, Donald stepped in front of Patricia, his body a living shield. He channeled the roaring energy of the soul bond, his eyes glowing with a lethal golden blue fire. With a single earth-shaking strike of his fist against the ground, a shockwave of pure kinetic heat exploded outward. The hunters were blasted back, their frozen armor shattering like glass against the stone walls. In seconds, the room was silent again, save for the heavy, protective thrum of Donald's heart. He turned to Patricia, his face a mask of cold, controlled fury, and saw her looking at him with awe rather than fear. The ruthless king had become a holy executioner, and he would let no shadow touch his son. After the attack, Donald retreated to the subterranean vaults of the citadel, leaving Patricia under the heavy guard of his most trusted warriors. He needed answers that only the ancient, dust-laden records of the kingdom could provide. As he scoured the leather-bound tomes of the Aurelian archives, the golden blue glow of his chest crest illuminated a terrifying truth. Patricia was not just a girl with a rare gift. She was the last surviving scion of the Aurelian bloodline. Her silver hair and rose-red eyes were not anomalies of birth, but the dormant marks of the original architects of the realm's magic. According to the texts, the Aurelian lineage were the only ones capable of truly bonding with the stolen sun to maintain the world's balance. High Priest Malphus had systematically hunted her ancestors to consolidate power, leaving her a foundling in a temple that intended to use her as a living battery. Donald traced the lineage charts with a trembling finger, realizing that Patricia's very existence was a threat to the cult's religious tyranny. She was the rightful ruler of the Thaw, and he had been holding the true queen of the realm in his arms. The revelation sharpened his possessive fury into a focused political weapon. He wasn't just protecting his mate, he was protecting the legitimate heart of the kingdom. He closed the tome with a resonant thud that echoed through the vaults. The time for hiding was over. He would march on the Cathedral of Bones and force the world to see the light they had tried so hard to extinguish. The obsidian gates of the citadel did not merely open. They heralded a storm of iron and light. Donald marched at the head of his elite guard, his black armor humming with the stabilized power Patricia had restored to him. Beside him, Patricia rode a white warhorse, her silver hair braided with sapphire silk and the stolen sun secured in a leather harness at her hip. She no longer looked like the dying girl from the ice. She carried the quiet, terrifying dignity of an Aurelian queen reclaiming her birthright. The march to the Cathedral of Bones was a journey through a dying world. Every village they passed was choked by Malphus's unnatural frost. The peasants huddled in hovels that were more like iceboxes. Donald's presence acted as a moving hearth, his alpha aura pushing back the biting winds. But it was the sight of Patricia that brought the people to their knees. They recognized the silver and the rose-red eyes from legends they had forgotten to believe in. As the jagged spires of the cathedral rose against the gray sky, a legion of Malphus's zealots blocked the path. The high priest stood on the high balcony, his voice amplified by dark magic, branding them heretics. Donald didn't stop. He dismounted, his boots crunching on the frozen earth with the finality of a death sentence. He reached back and took Patricia's hand, the soul bond flaring with a brilliance that rivaled the winter sun. "Let them pray to their ice," Donald growled, his golden blue eyes fixed on the cathedral doors. "Today, we bring the fire." With a roar that shattered the nearby ice-laden trees, the king and his queen charged into the heart of the enemy. The Cathedral of Bones groaned as the massive oak doors splintered inward under the weight of Donald's fury. Inside, the air was stagnant and frigid, smelling of incense and rot. High Priest Malphus stood atop the altar, his hands raised to channel the dark frost of the permafrost, but his eyes widened in genuine terror as Donald stepped into the nave. The king was no longer just a man. He was a colossus of obsidian armor and radiant cerulean light, the soul bond with Patricia acting as a bellows to his inner fire. "Blasphemers!" Malphus shrieked, unleashing a wave of jagged ice shards. Donald didn't flinch. He raised a single arm, and a shimmering heat shield erupted, vaporizing the ice into harmless mist before it could touch Patricia. He moved with a terrifying, deliberate pace, his boots cracking the marble floor. Behind him, Patricia stepped forward, the stolen sun in her hands beginning to hum in a frequency that resonated with the very stones of the cathedral. Donald reached the altar in 3 predatory strides. He didn't use his blade. He reached through Malphus's magical wards as if they were cobwebs and seized the priest by his vestments. With a single earth-shaking roar, Donald slammed Malphus into the altar, the sheer physical force of the Alpha's dominance shattering the priest's connection to the dark frost. "You called her a tool," Donald growled, his voice vibrating in the marrow of everyone present. "I call her queen." He stepped back, allowing Patricia to raise the stolen sun. As she channeled her Aurelian blood, a blinding golden light exploded from the artifact, stripping Malphus of his stolen power and leaving him a shivering mortal wreck amidst the ruins of his own tyranny. As the blinding light from the stolen sun receded, a profound silence filled the shattered cathedral. Patricia stood at the center of the nave, her silver hair glowing with an ethereal luminescence as she approached the ancient pedestal at the heart of the sanctuary, the lay anchor. For centuries, this stone had been used to channel the realm's life force, but under Malphus, it had been choked by artificial frost. With Donald standing as a sentinel at her back, his hand resting supportively on her shoulder, Patricia lowered the amber sphere into its rightful cradle. The moment the artifact touched the anchor, the ground beneath them groaned. A surge of pure Aurelian heat rippled outward, not as a destructive blast, but as a healing wave. The jagged ice pillars that had held the cathedral in a frozen grip began to weep, melting into crystal-clear water that pooled on the marble floors. Outside the heavy oak doors, the shrieking blizzard died instantly, replaced by a stillness that the kingdom had not known for generations. Donald watched as the frost veins on Patricia's skin dissolved, leaving her complexion as warm and radiant as a summer morning. The cerulean crest on his own chest settled into a soft, permanent hum, the last of his curse evaporating along with the unnatural winter. He stepped forward, pulling her into the heat of his embrace as they watched the gray clouds above the cathedral break. Through the shattered roof, a single golden beam of true sunlight pierced the gloom, illuminating the path back to the citadel. The era of the permafrost was over. The world was finally waking up. The spring that followed the fall of Malphas was the most vibrant in living memory. The snows of the Obsidian citadel had fully retreated, revealing a valley of lush, deep emerald and wildflowers that bloomed in shades of violet and gold. On the great balcony overlooking the kingdom, Donald stood dressed in his formal royal leathers, his obsidian armor replaced by velvet the color of the midnight sky. Beside him stood Patricia, the Silver Queen, draped in Aurelian silk that shimmered like liquid moonlight. The air was no longer a weapon of frost, but a gentle balm, carrying the scent of blooming jasmine and damp earth. As Donald placed the crown of woven white gold upon Patricia's head, a roar went up from the thousands gathered below. Not a roar of fear, but of profound, collective relief. The people looked up and saw not a ruthless tyrant and a fragile outcast, but a unified front of fire and frost. Donald's hand found Patricia's, his thumb tracing the warm skin of her knuckles, feeling the steady, calm hum of the soul bond that had saved them both. His empire was finally at peace, the border skirmishes and the dark religious shadows replaced by a new accord. Donald had spent a lifetime seeking absolute control to prevent chaos, only to realize that true stability came from the partnership of a mate who could temper his rage with her clarity. As they looked out over their thriving land, the golden yearlings of the royal guard trotting through the meadows below, Donald leaned in to whisper against her ear. The ruthless Alpha King had found his queen in the ice, and in saving her, he had finally found the warmth to save himself. The dawn of the Aurelian age had begun, and for the first time in his life, Donald was not just a ruler, but a man who was home.